controversy by healing on the Sabbath. And this week, Jesus is at it again. But this time, Jesus doesn't just cause a theological disturbance. He also causes a social disturbance. It's the Sabbath again, but instead of being in a synagogue, Jesus has been invited to share a meal at the house of a leading Pharisee. And many guests were invited, and they were watching him closely. Suddenly, there stood in front of Jesus a man who had a sleeping disorder. And Jesus asked the lawyers and the Pharisees around the table, "Is it lawful to cure people on the Sabbath?" They remained silent. So Jesus took him and healed him and sent him away. And then he said to them, "If one of you had a child or an ox that had fallen into a well, would you not immediately pull it out on the Sabbath day?" And they could make no reply to this. But Jesus doesn't stop there with healing on the Sabbath. He then begins to make some social commentary. Having watched all the guests enter into the dinner, the luncheon, he noticed their behavior. He points out that when the guests arrive, they begin looking for the places of honor to take their seat. And Jesus essentially says to them, practice humility. Practice putting others first. Don't choose the highest place, but the lowest place. For all who exalt themselves will be humbled, and those who humble themselves will be exalted. And then he turns his attention from the guests who were invited to the leader of the Pharisees who had done the inviting to his host. And he says to his host, "You know, when you give a luncheon or a dinner, don't invite your friends or your brother or your family or your rich neighbors in case they may invite you in return and you would be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, and you will be blessed." Why? Because they cannot repay you. Now that's what I call a social controversy. And I wonder, what do you think caused the greater discomfort that day? What created the bigger challenge for his audience? Was it his healing on the Sabbath? Or was it talking about guest lists for parties? I can tell you where my discomfort lies. And I've had it since I was a kid. I think I remember the first time I ever heard this episode from the Gospel of Luke in church. I remember thinking to myself, what about my birthday? Am I not allowed to invite my friends or my family to my birthday party? Must I really invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind? Is that like a 3.5? So I ignored it. Can you imagine what a sign of the kingdom it would have been had my birthday parties looked like that? Isn't that the sort of thing that God is looking for? But I want to be clear about something. In today's episode, I don't think Jesus is talking so much about helping the less fortunate. I don't think he's so much talking about feeding the hungry. He does talk about those things in other places, but not on this occasion. Rather, on this occasion, I think the emphasis, what he is focusing upon, is hospitality. And a particular kind of hospitality. The kind of hospitality that goes beyond welcome to friendship. The kind of hospitality that goes beyond serving and has kinship as its goal. In his book, tattoos on the heart, Father Gregory Boyle describes this sort of hospitality. He begins, Mother Teresa diagnosed the world's ills in this way. We've just forgotten that we belong to each other. Kinship is what happens to us when we refuse to let that happen. Kinship is exactly what God has in mind for us. Often we strive the high moral distance that separates us from them. And yet it is God's dream come true when we recognize that there is no distance that separates us, that there is no daylight between us. Serving others is good. It's a start. But it's just the hallway that leads to the grand ballroom. Kinship. Not serving the other, but being one with the other. Jesus was not simply a man for others. He was one with them. And there's a world of difference in that. And in his chapter on kinship, Father Gregory goes through and tells all sorts of stories about kinship. Kinship around the table, kinship that can happen to us in a moment if we allow it. And one story he tells in particular, one of my favorites, happened back in 2005. The First Lady, Laura Bush, made it out to Southern California to tour Homeboy Industries, which is a gang recovery program. It's the largest of its kind. It's been going on for 30 years now. And she visited Homeboy Industries, visited Homeboy Silk Screening. Of course, everybody that worked there had a record. And so the Secret Service had a bit of a problem because, of course, they limit the number of people that can get around the First Lady on one of her visits. And so they asked for a list of 30 people that would be there, their names and their social security numbers. And then a few days later, they kind of show up and say, Father Boyle, these people have records. And he's like, well, that's kind of the idea. And so after they worked through that, she visited, saw everything. And then later that summer, one of her aides called Father Greg and said, we would like you to come speak at a youth conference at Howard University in Washington, D.C. And we would like you to be our guest at the White House afterwards. And we would like you to bring 3 homies with you. Now, Father Greg doesn't know if the First Lady used the H word, said homies or not. But he picked 3 homies, 3 that if you were in Hollywood and were casting gangsters, these were the 3 guys. Charlie, Felipe, and Alex. Very large, heavily tattooed, and all done quite a bit of time. So he invites them, and he decides that it probably isn't wise to show up at the White House in, 44H Dickies. And so he takes them to the men's warehouse to buy suits. And as soon as they walk in the door, all of the salespeople rush at them, hoping to help them as quickly as possible so that they can get out of the store as quickly as possible. Father Greg said, yes, we need 3 suits because we're having dinner at the White House. Eyes are rolling. But they proceed to help them get on these suits. Father Greg's kind of hanging out, and then he sees Alex come in with this suit, standing in front of one of those, 6-sided mirrors. And he's just staring at himself. He's covered in tattoos. But his heart is covered in nothing. It's an open heart. You can get right to it. And he's in this suit. He's alone, open mouth, and he's just staring at himself. He's hypnotized by the guy that is looking back at him in the mirror. Father Greg writes, Alex's job at Homeboy is to help supervise our part-time workers in their maintenance tasks around the headquarters. Mainly, though, he gives tours. Reluctant at first to do so, Alex has come to inhabit this role with a certain degree of delight and even his own particular brand of panache. He'll greet you at the front door, introduce you to the job developers, explain our release program, and hand you goggles so you can watch tattoos being removed on the premises. He gives a good tour. Blessed are the single-hearted. Jesus meant Alex. Few hearts come as true and pure as Alex's. And I approach him with the same caution I would at a deer in the forest. Are you okay? And his eyes don't meet mine. He's transfixed. Damn, G, he says. I'm already pinching myself. Like he can't believe that he's in a suit. And that the guy in the suit is headed to the White House. Well, about a week before they are scheduled to fly to Washington, D.C., Father Greg decided to call Alex in his office and said, now you did get permission to go to the White House from your parole officer, right? You did ask her about this. I said, yeah, of course I asked her. I said, whew. But she said no. He said, what? When were you going to tell me? Well, I wasn't going to tell you because I'm afraid you wouldn't let me go. And he's like, Alex, we got to do this right. So Father Greg gets on the phone and talks to the parole officer. And the parole officer said, yep, nope, he can't go. He's high control. And he's like, well, we're going to the White House. Yep, he's high control. He's not leaving the state. Is there somebody a notch above you that I can talk to? The notch above person comes on. Yep, he's high control. He's not going. Is there somebody higher than you? And the third person, nope, he's not going. Father Greg said they all seem to have this sort of attitude of, and Alex, who do you really think you are that you get to go to the White House? And so after a flurry of emails from the White House to the parole office, Alex is finally given permission to go. Well, the morning of the trip, there are a lot of mishaps. Somebody forgot their suit, somebody forgot their ID. The White House, where they go to Washington, D.C., Father Greg teaches at the conference, and that evening, they're at the White House. And he said butlers walk the halls carrying long stemmed glasses of white wine on silver trays. The homies snatch those puppies up quick. And every room, the blue room, the green room, all of those different colored rooms seem to have either an elegant combo of musicians or a brass band. The gold room holds the buffet. Never in my life have I seen or tasted more exquisite food. I go back 3 times. Rack of lamb, perfection. A salmon the size of a duffel bag. Pastas, salads. They have these small white potatoes cut lengthwise, and a hole has been carefully bored out and filled with caviar, garnished with a sprig of chive. And I'm standing with Alex when he pops one of those suckers into his mouth, and almost as quickly, with his discretion valve turned off, he spits the potato mess into a napkin and says, "This stuff tastes nasty." But he doesn't say stuff. His volume turns heads. And perhaps it was my imagination, but it sure seems that the Secret Service lunges ever so slightly in our direction. The next day, we are headed home. And somewhere in mid-flight, Alex says he needs to go to the restroom. And I point to the back of the plane. 45 minutes later, Alex returns to his seat. I say, "Oye, ¿qué pasó? I thought you fell in." "Oh," Alex says with his signature innocence, "I was just talking to the lady over there." And I turn around and see a lone flight attendant standing at the back. Alex winces a bit. "I made her cry. I hope that's okay." "Well, Alex," I brace myself, "that might depend upon what you actually said to her." "Well," Alex begins, "she saw my homeboy industry shirt and tattoos, and well, she started asking me a gang of questions." And you pause with a whiff of embarrassment. introduces her to our job developers, explains our release program, and hands her goggles to watch tattoos being removed. And I told her that last night we made history, he says with brimming excitement. For the first time in the history of this country, 3 gang members walked into the White House. We had dinner here. I told her the food tasted nasty. And he pauses and gets still. And she cried. I get still myself. Well, Mio, what'd you expect? She just caught a glimpse of you. She saw that you are somebody. She recognized you as the shape of God's heart. And sometimes people cry when they see that. Suddenly, kinship. 2 souls feeling their worth. Flight attendant, gang member, 34,000 feet. No daylight separation.